177 years ago, in an isolated plantation deep in the hills of Tennessee, military records and local court documents mentioned a case so disturbing that it was buried in silence. The Whitmore family disappeared from official registries, but not from the whispered memories of the community. Their absence left deep scars, marking generations with a silent trauma that only now begins to be revealed. Before continuing, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. In 2024, during restoration work on the old Whitmore estate in rural Tennessee, construction workers discovered something that would change everything historians thought they knew about plantation life in the antebellum South. Hidden inside the main house's chimney, wrapped in oiled cloth and preserved by decades of soot and ash, was a leather-bound journal written in careful script. The pages, yellowed but legible, bore the signature of Martha Henley, head housekeeper of the Whitmore plantation from 1845 to 1849. What Martha documented in those pages would reveal why, in 4 years of operation, not a single child born on the Whitmore plantation lived to see their second birthday. The journal contained meticulous records of births, deaths, and the horrific systematic practices that made survival impossible for the youngest and most vulnerable. Chapter 1. The Whitmore Estate and its Silent Halls. The Whitmore plantation sprawled across 800 acres of fertile Tennessee soil, established in 1844 by Colonel Jeremiah Whitmore, a Virginia transplant who brought with him 27 enslaved people and ambitions of building a cotton empire. Unlike the grand mansions of the Deep South, the Whitmore house was a sturdy two-story structure of local stone and timber, built to withstand harsh mountain winters. But it was what happened within those walls that would mark it as a place of unspeakable horror. Martha Henley's journal begins on January 15, 1845, her first day as head housekeeper. A woman of mixed heritage, born free in Kentucky, but sold into slavery as a child through fraudulent papers. Martha possessed the rare ability to read and write, skills she had hidden throughout her enslavement. Her position in the house gave her access to every corner of the plantation's operations, and what she witnessed compelled her to keep a secret record. "Colonel Whitmore has established rules for the quarters that chill my blood," Martha wrote in her second entry. "No infant crying is permitted after sunset. Mrs. Whitmore cannot abide the sound, claiming it disturbs her delicate constitution. The punishment for violation is severe, and parents have been forced to make impossible choices to protect their families." The plantation operated under a regime of terror, disguised as efficiency. Jeremiah Whitmore, a veteran of conflicts with Native American tribes, ran his estate with military precision. His wife, Cordelia, a woman of supposed refinement from Charleston society, had developed what she called household management techniques that went far beyond typical plantation cruelty. Together, they created a system designed to break not just bodies, but spirits and family bonds. Martha's journal reveals that the Whitmores had implemented what they termed breeding protocols, forced reproduction designed to increase their human property. Young women were paired with selected men, regardless of their wishes, and pregnancies were monitored with the same attention given to livestock. But the fate awaiting these children was darker than anyone could have imagined. The housekeeper documented a pattern that emerged within months of the plantation's establishment. Children born healthy would begin showing signs of weakness within weeks. Fevers, respiratory distress, and failure to thrive became common. Local doctors, when summoned, attributed the deaths to natural causes and the weak constitution common to the Negro race, explanations that satisfied white authorities but horrified those who knew the truth. Dr. Pemberton arrives monthly to examine the women and children, Martha wrote in March 1845. But his treatments seem designed to weaken rather than heal. I have watched him administer substances that bring on violent illness in the little ones. When I questioned the wisdom of his methods, I was told that my concern was not welcome. The Whitmore plantation's reputation in the county was that of a well-managed, profitable operation. Neighbors praised Jeremiah's discipline and Cordelia's domestic efficiency. Local newspapers occasionally mentioned the estate's cotton yields and the couple's contributions to community events. But beneath this veneer of respectability, a systematic campaign of infanticide was being carried out with methodical precision. Martha's records indicate that by the end of 1845, 11 children had been born on the plantation. None survived past 18 months. The pattern was so consistent that even other enslaved people began to whisper about a curse on the land. But Martha knew it was no supernatural force claiming these young lives. It was something far more deliberate and terrifying. Chapter 2. The Doctor's Visits and Strange Medicine. Dr. Horatio Pemberton arrived at the Whitmore plantation on the third Tuesday of every month, carrying his black leather medical bag and an air of scientific authority that impressed the white community. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania's medical school, Pemberton had established a practice serving the wealthy planters of central Tennessee. His specialty, he claimed, was managing the peculiar medical needs of the Negro population. Martha's journal entries from spring 1845 reveal the disturbing nature of these medical visits. "Dr. Pemberton has brought new bottles of medicine," she wrote on April 20th. "The liquid is clear, but has a bitter smell that makes the children cry when they taste it. He insists it will strengthen their constitutions, but I have observed only weakness following his treatments." The housekeeper began documenting a pattern in Pemberton's prescriptions. Healthy infants received daily doses of what he called constitutional strengtheners. Children showing any signs of illness were given larger quantities of different mixtures. Those who survived the initial treatments were subjected to additional therapies that included bloodletting, harsh purgatives, and substances that caused violent vomiting and diarrhea. Young Sarah's baby, born strong and healthy in February, has been given the doctor's medicine for 6 weeks now, Martha recorded in May 1845. The child, once plump and active, has become listless and refuses to nurse. When Sarah pleaded for the treatments to stop, she was whipped and told that questioning medical authority was insubordination. Dr. Pemberton's methods were not random acts of cruelty, but part of what Martha discovered was a systematic medical experiment. Hidden in the doctor's own notes, which she found during one of his visits, were detailed observations about the effects of various compounds on the Negro constitution, and methods for controlling population growth among inferior races. Doom. The plantation had become a testing ground for theories rooted in the racist medical science of the era. The doctor's experiments extended beyond simple poisoning. Martha documented procedures that involved deliberate exposure to diseases, starvation protocols disguised as dietary management, and physical interventions that caused internal injuries. Children who showed resistance to the chemical treatments were subjected to increasingly severe measures designed to ensure their ultimate demise. "I found Dr. Pemberton's journal left open in the parlor," Martha wrote in June 1845. "His writings speak of proving that the Negro child cannot survive without constant white supervision and medical intervention. He believes his work will support arguments that our people are naturally weak and require controlling. The children are dying not from weakness, but from his deliberate actions." The collaboration between Dr. Pemberton and the Whitmores went beyond medical treatment. The doctor provided scientific justification for practices that would have shocked even other slaveholders. His reports to medical journals spoke of natural infant mortality rates among slaves, while omitting any mention of his interventions. These publications helped establish him as an expert on Negro medicine and brought him recognition in academic circles. Martha's growing understanding of the medical conspiracy filled her with both rage and helplessness. She began secretly treating children with remedies passed down from her grandmother, But the doctor's poisons were too powerful and his visits too frequent. Every month brought new children under his care, and every month brought new deaths that were recorded as natural causes in official documents. The housekeeper also discovered that Dr. Pemberton was corresponding with other physicians across the South, sharing his findings and methods. The Whitmore plantation was part of a larger network of medical experimentation on enslaved people, disguised as healthcare, but designed to support theories of racial inferiority and justify the brutalities of slavery. Chapter 3. The Breeding Program and Cordelia's Rules. Cordelia Whitmore's approach to managing her human property combined the calculated brutality of plantation economics with a personal sadism that horrified even hardened observers. Martha's journal reveals that by summer 1845, Mrs. Whitmore had established what she called proper breeding protocols, designed to maximize the plantation's human inventory while ensuring complete control over every aspect of enslaved people's reproductive lives. Mrs. Whitmore has selected young women for what she terms productive pairing. Martha wrote in July 1845, Sarah, barely 16, has been matched with Thomas, despite her pleas. When Sarah resisted, Mrs. Whitmore explained that resistance would result in separation from her younger siblings. The choice was compliance or the destruction of her remaining family bonds. The mistress of the plantation had developed a system that went beyond typical forced breeding programs found on other estates. Cordelia maintained detailed records of menstrual cycles, tracking each woman's fertility with the precision of a livestock manager. She personally supervised the pairing process and required monthly reports on the success of her arrangements. Pregnancies were celebrated not as the creation of new life, but as the production of valuable property. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this story. I want to know how far these silenced accounts reach. Martha documented the psychological torture that accompanied the breeding program. Mrs. Whitmore has informed the women that their children will be raised according to her standards, the housekeeper wrote in August 1845. She claims that Negro children require special discipline from birth to overcome their natural deficiencies. The mothers are told they are unfit to raise their own babies and that intervention is necessary for the children's survival. The reality behind Cordelia's child-rearing philosophy was far more sinister than harsh discipline. Martha's observations revealed that Mrs. Whitmore viewed each newborn as an opportunity to test her theories about racial control and social engineering. Children were removed from their mothers within weeks of birth and placed under the direct supervision of white overseers who implemented feeding schedules, sleeping arrangements, and daily routines designed to break natural bonds between parents and children. Little James, born to Mary in September, has been taken to the overseer's cabin, Martha recorded in her October 1845 entry. Mrs. Whitmore declares that the child must be raised without the corrupting influence of his mother's affection. Mary is permitted to see her son for 1 hour each Sunday, but only to provide nursing. Any display of maternal attachment is punished with reduced rations. The separation of mothers and children served multiple purposes in Cordelia's system. It prevented the formation of strong family units that might resist plantation authority. It created psychological dependency on white approval for access to children, and it provided a steady supply of infants for Dr. Pemberton's medical experiments. The combination of forced breeding and immediate separation created a cycle of trauma that affected every person of childbearing age on the plantation. Martha's journal reveals that Mrs. Whitmore took personal pleasure in the suffering she orchestrated. She often remarks that the crying of separated mothers proves the emotional instability of the Negro temperament. Martha wrote, "When I attempted to comfort Susan after her baby was taken, Mrs. Whitmore observed that such consolation only encourages weakness. She believes that breaking maternal bonds creates stronger, more obedient workers." The breeding program's true horror lay not just in its cruelty, but in its systematic nature. Cordelia maintained detailed genealogical records, planned future pairings based on desired traits, and corresponded with other plantation mistresses about best practices in human breeding. Her methods were being refined and shared, creating a network of scientific racism disguised as domestic management. Chapter 4. The Underground Network and Hidden Resistance. Despite the overwhelming terror that characterized daily life on the Whitmore plantation, Martha's journal reveals that resistance networks operated in the shadows, carrying information and occasionally helping people escape the horrors of the estate. These networks, composed of both enslaved and free people of color, along with a few sympathetic whites, represented the only hope for survival in a system designed to crush human spirits. A woman called herself Rose visited the quarters last night, Martha wrote in September 1845. She moved like a ghost between the cabins, speaking in whispers about places where families could find safety. Her words brought both hope and terror. Hope for escape, terror of the consequences if we were discovered helping her. Rose, as Martha learned, was part of a loosely organized network that had been monitoring the Whitmore plantation since its establishment. Unlike the formal underground railroad routes that helped enslaved people reach northern states, this network focused on documenting and exposing the systematic atrocities being committed on isolated plantations. They understood that some crimes were so horrific that simply facilitating escape was insufficient. Evidence had to be preserved for future justice. Martha's position as head housekeeper made her a valuable source of information for the network, but it also placed her in extraordinary danger. Her ability to read and write, combined with her access to the main house and its documents, meant she could provide detailed accounts of the plantation's operations. However, her visibility also made disappearing impossible without raising immediate suspicion. Rose explained that similar horrors are being documented on plantations across Tennessee and neighboring states, Martha recorded in October 1845. Dr. Pemberton's methods are not unique to our plantation. There appears to be a coordinated effort among certain medical professionals and plantation owners to conduct experiments on our people under the guise of healthcare and management. The network had identified at least 12 plantations where systematic infanticide was being carried out under medical supervision. Each location followed similar patterns, respected doctors providing specialized care for enslaved populations, unusually high infant mortality rates, and detailed record-keeping that suggested scientific experimentation rather than genuine medical treatment. The scope of the conspiracy extended far beyond individual acts of cruelty. Martha began copying documents and hiding them throughout the plantation grounds, creating multiple caches of evidence that the network could retrieve if she was discovered or killed. Her journal mentions locations in the root cellar, inside hollow trees, and within the chimney where she ultimately hid her own writings. This distribution of evidence reflected both her desperation to expose the truth and her understanding that her own survival was uncertain. "I have hidden Dr. Pemberton's notes behind the loose stone in the kitchen fireplace," she wrote in November 1845. "His correspondence with other doctors reveals the true extent of their experimentation. They are not trying to heal our children. They are trying to prove that we cannot survive without their control. Every death serves their larger purpose of justifying our enslavement." The resistance network faced enormous challenges in gathering and preserving evidence. Most enslaved people could not read or write, making documentation difficult. Those who attempted to help often disappeared or were sold to distant plantations. White allies were few and risked their own safety and social standing by opposing the plantation system. Yet the network persisted, driven by the understanding that silence would allow the horrors to continue indefinitely. Martha's journal reveals that the network had begun planning a coordinated effort to expose the medical experimentation being conducted on enslaved children. Representatives from various plantations were gathering testimony, copying documents, and preparing to present evidence to northern abolitionists and sympathetic government officials. The plan required precise timing and absolute secrecy, as discovery would mean death for everyone involved. Chapter 5. The Winter of 1846 and Escalating Horror. The winter of 1846 brought unprecedented cold to Tennessee, but the freezing temperatures were nothing compared to the chill that settled over the Whitmore plantation as Cordelia and Dr. Pemberton escalated their systematic destruction of enslaved families. Martha's journal entries from this period reveal a level of calculated cruelty that defied human comprehension as the partnership between the plantation mistress and the doctor reached new depths of scientific sadism. "The cold has trapped us all inside the quarters for days at a time," Martha wrote in January 1846. Mrs. Whitmore has declared that winter provides ideal conditions for her controlled environment studies. The children, already weakened by Dr. Pemberton's treatments, are now subjected to deliberate exposure to cold and inadequate nutrition. She claims this will test their natural resilience. Dr. Pemberton's monthly visits had become weekly occurrences during the winter months. His experiments had evolved from simple poisoning to complex protocols that combined chemical treatments, environmental stresses, and psychological manipulation. Martha documented how healthy children were deliberately subjected to conditions designed to induce pneumonia, while sick children were denied warmth and proper care to observe natural disease progression. The doctor had begun maintaining what he called controlled comparison groups among the plantation's children. Some received his standard toxic treatments, others were subjected to starvation protocols, and a few were used as controls to measure the effectiveness of various methods of inducing illness and death. His notes, which Martha continued to copy and hide, referred to the children by numbers rather than names, reducing human beings to experimental subjects. Baby number 7, born to Ruth in December, has been assigned to what Dr. Pemberton calls the respiratory stress study, Martha recorded in February 1846. The child is kept in the coldest cabin with inadequate clothing and blankets. When Ruth attempted to provide additional warmth, she was punished with 20 lashes and told that interfering with medical treatment was a form of rebellion. Cordelia's role in the winter experiments went beyond simple compliance with medical protocols. She had developed her own theories about environmental conditioning and used the harsh weather as an opportunity to test the limits of infant survival. Children were deliberately underfed, underclothed, and exposed to conditions that would challenge even healthy adults. Their suffering was meticulously documented in journals that read like scientific papers rather than records of human torture. Martha's growing horror at the escalating cruelty was matched by her increasing determination to document every detail of the systematic infanticide. "I have begun sketching the children's conditions," she wrote in March 1846. "Words alone cannot capture the deliberate nature of their suffering. Mrs. Whitmore has created charts tracking weight loss, symptom progression, and what she terms behavioral degradation. These documents must be preserved as evidence of her crimes." The winter also brought new collaborators to the plantation. Dr. Pemberton had invited colleagues from medical schools in Nashville and Louisville to observe his work and contribute their own experimental protocols. These visiting physicians treated the plantation like a laboratory, discussing the children's suffering with academic detachment while proposing new methods of testing their theories about racial inferiority. 3 doctors arrived yesterday to observe Dr. Pemberton's methods, Martha documented in April 1846. They spoke of the children as specimens rather than human beings, debating the effectiveness of various approaches to inducing mortality. One suggested that emotional trauma might be as effective as physical intervention in achieving their goals. Mrs. Whitmore expressed enthusiasm for implementing psychological torture protocols. The collaboration between medical professionals and plantation owners had created a network of scientific racism that extended across state lines. Martha learned that similar experiments were being conducted on plantations in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, with regular correspondence between participants sharing techniques and results. The systematic murder of enslaved children had become a coordinated research program designed to provide scientific justification for slavery. By the end of winter 1846, not a single child born on the Whitmore plantation in the previous year remained alive. The 100% mortality rate was celebrated by Dr. Pemberton as proof of his theories about the necessity of white medical intervention in sustaining black life. His published papers, which omitted mention of his deliberate interventions, contributed to medical literature supporting the racist ideology that enslaved people were naturally weak and dependent on white care. Chapter 6. The Evidence Mounts and the Network Responds. As spring 1846 arrived at the Whitmore plantation, Martha's hidden documentation had grown into a comprehensive archive of systematic infanticide and medical experimentation. Her journal entries reveal both the mounting evidence of coordinated atrocities and the underground network's increasingly desperate efforts to expose the truth before more children died in the name of racist pseudoscience. Rose returned last night with devastating news, Martha wrote in May 1846. The network has confirmed that at least 30 plantations across the South are participating in similar medical experiments. The scale of coordinated child murder is beyond what any of us imagined. Dr. Pemberton's work is part of a systematic effort to provide scientific justification for the claim that our people cannot survive without white control. The underground network had begun gathering testimony from survivors and witnesses across multiple states, creating a body of evidence that documented the scope of medical experimentation on enslaved populations. Martha's detailed records from the Whitmore plantation had become a central piece of this larger investigation, providing the kind of systematic documentation that could potentially convince Northern abolitionists and sympathetic government officials to take action. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the story of the Whitmore plantation children reach more people. Martha's role as a documenter had evolved into something approaching that of an investigative journalist, though the term wouldn't exist for decades. She had begun interviewing other enslaved people about their experiences, recording not just facts, but emotional testimony that captured the human cost of the plantation's systematic cruelty. Her writing combined meticulous detail with passionate advocacy, creating documents that served both as evidence and as powerful indictments of the entire system. "Sarah spoke to me today about the loss of her 3 children," Martha recorded in June 1846. Her words were barely audible through her tears, but I transcribed every detail of how each baby was taken from her and subjected to Dr. Pemberton's treatments. She begged me to ensure that their deaths would not be forgotten, that someone, somewhere, would know that they lived and were loved. The network had also identified sympathetic individuals within white society who could potentially help expose the medical conspiracy. These allies included Northern physicians who had grown suspicious of their Southern colleagues' research, religious leaders who opposed slavery on moral grounds, and journalists who had begun investigating reports of unusual mortality rates on certain plantations. However, approaching these potential allies required extreme caution, as discovery would mean certain death for network members. Dr. Pemberton's confidence in his work had made him increasingly careless about concealing his activities. Martha noted that his correspondence with other physicians had become more explicit about the experimental nature of his treatments. and his visits to the plantation now included detailed photographic documentation of the children's conditions. This growing archive of evidence, while horrifying in its content, provided the network with increasingly powerful proof of systematic medical murder. The doctor has begun creating what he calls photographic studies of the children's deterioration, Martha wrote in July 1846. These images, which he claims will illustrate the natural weakness of the Negro constitution, actually document the effects of his deliberate poisoning and torture. I have managed to copy some of these photographs, and they provide undeniable evidence of his crimes. Cordelia's own documentation had become equally valuable as evidence of conspiracy. Her detailed breeding records, child-rearing protocols, and correspondence with other plantation mistresses revealed a coordinated effort to implement systematic population control through infanticide. Martha had copied extensive portions of these materials, creating a paper trail that connected the Whitmore plantation to a larger network of coordinated atrocities. The network's investigation had revealed that the medical experimentation program received financial support from wealthy planters and academic institutions across the South. Research grants, equipment donations, and publication subsidies had created an infrastructure that supported and encouraged the systematic murder of enslaved children. The economic incentives behind the program added another layer of evidence to the growing case for prosecution. Martha's documentation efforts had not gone unnoticed by the plantation's management. Several entries from late summer 1846 revealed growing suspicion about her activities and increasing restrictions on her movements. The danger to her own life was escalating, but so was her determination to ensure that the evidence she had gathered would survive even if she did not. Chapter 7. The Discovery and Flight. September 1846 brought the crisis Martha had long feared: the discovery of her documentation activities and the network's planned exposure of the medical conspiracy. Her journal entries from this period, written in increasingly hurried script, reveal both the immediate danger she faced and her desperate efforts to ensure the evidence would survive her likely death. Mrs. Whitmore found me copying Dr. Pemberton's correspondence this morning, Martha wrote on September 15th, 1846. Her face showed not surprise but satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She informed me that they have suspected my activities for months and have been allowing me to continue in order to identify my accomplices. I have walked into a trap that may destroy the entire network. The confrontation with Cordelia revealed that the plantation owners had been aware of resistance activities far longer than the network had realized. Martha learned that her careful movements, her questions about the children's treatments, and even her hidden caches of documents had been observed and reported by informants among the enslaved population. The isolation and terror of plantation life had created conditions where survival often depended on betraying others. Dr. Pemberton arrived at the plantation 3 days earlier than scheduled, bringing with him 2 associates who Martha recognized as the visiting physicians from the previous winter. Their presence suggested that her discovery was part of a larger crackdown on resistance activities across multiple plantations. The network's careful planning had been compromised, and members throughout the region were likely facing similar exposure. "They have locked me in the root cellar while they decide my fate," Martha wrote by candlelight on September 18th. "Through the small window, I can see them burning documents in the yard. Not just my hidden papers, but Dr. Pemberton's experimental records and Mrs. Whitmore's breeding documentation. They are destroying evidence that could have exposed their crimes to the world." The systematic destruction of evidence revealed the coordination and planning behind the plantation's operations. Rather than acting from impulse or individual cruelty, the owners had clearly anticipated the possibility of exposure and had prepared protocols for eliminating documentation. This level of organization suggested that similar preparation existed at other experimental sites, making the network's mission even more crucial. Martha's isolation in the cellar provided her with time to complete her final journal entries and plan for the preservation of her most critical documentation. She had managed to conceal her personal journal and several key documents in locations that had not yet been discovered, including the Chimney hiding place that would preserve her testimony for future generations. "I can hear them discussing my execution," she wrote on September 19th. "Mrs. Whitmore favors immediate hanging as an example to others, but Dr. Pemberton has suggested that I could serve as a subject for his studies of stress and trauma responses. The casual nature of their discussion of my death reveals the complete absence of humanity in their thinking." The debate over Martha's fate reflected the calculating nature of the plantation's management. Even her death was being considered as an opportunity for further experimentation, demonstrating that the medical conspiracy had created an environment where human life had no value beyond its utility for research purposes. The systematic dehumanization extended beyond enslaved people to anyone who threatened the continuation of the experimental program. Despite her desperate situation, Martha used her final days to complete the most comprehensive possible record of the plantation's crimes. Her last entries include detailed descriptions of the locations where she had hidden evidence, coded messages for network members, and passionate appeals to future readers to ensure that the children's deaths would not be forgotten. "To whoever finds these words," Martha wrote in her final entry on September 21st, 1846, "know that every child born on this plantation was murdered in the name of science and racial hatred. Their deaths were not natural, but were the result of systematic poisoning, deliberate exposure, and medical experimentation designed to support the lie that our people are naturally weak. Do not let their sacrifice be meaningless. Use this testimony to expose the truth." Martha Henley was executed on September 22, 1846, but not before she had successfully hidden her journal in the chimney of the main house, where it would remain undiscovered for 178 years. Her sacrifice ensured that the truth about the Whitmore plantation would eventually be revealed, though justice would be long delayed. Chapter 8. The Cover-Up and Official Silence. The execution of Martha Henley marked the beginning of an extensive cover-up operation that would erase the Whitmore plantation from official records and silence all evidence of the systematic infanticide that had occurred there. Documents discovered alongside Martha's journal reveal the coordinated effort by local authorities, medical professionals, and government officials to bury the truth and protect those involved in the conspiracy. Within weeks of Martha's death, the Whitmore plantation ceased to exist in any official capacity. Property records were altered to show the land as abandoned. Tax rolls were modified to remove any mention of the estate, and local newspapers that had previously covered plantation social events suddenly stopped referencing the Whitmore family entirely. This systematic erasure of documentation required coordination at multiple levels of government and society. Dr. Pemberton's medical records were confiscated by federal marshals who claimed to be investigating irregularities in plantation medical care. But these same officials ensured that the documents disappeared entirely rather than being preserved as evidence. The doctor himself received a federal appointment to a medical position in Washington, D.C., effectively removing him from Tennessee while rewarding him for his silence about the experimental program. The speed with which all traces of the plantation have been eliminated suggests preparation and coordination, wrote Samuel Morrison, a federal inspector whose own notes were discovered in the National Archives in 2023. Local officials claim no knowledge of systematic child mortality, yet their actions in destroying records and relocating witnesses suggest detailed advance planning for this cover-up operation. Cordelia Whitmore was quietly relocated to her family's estate in South Carolina, where she lived under an assumed name until her death in 1869. Her extensive documentation of breeding programs and child-rearing experiments was reportedly destroyed in a fire that consumed her new residence, though investigators noted that the blaze appeared to have been deliberately set and targeted specific rooms containing papers and documents. The enslaved people who had survived the plantation's horrors were scattered across multiple states through immediate sales that separated families and prevented the formation of communities where shared memories could preserve testimony about the experimental program. This deliberate dispersion ensured that no concentrated group of witnesses remained who could provide coherent accounts of what had occurred at the Whitmore estate. Local religious leaders who had previously ministered to enslaved populations were pressured to avoid discussing the plantation or its former residents. Church records that might have contained baptismal or burial information for the murdered children were either destroyed or had pages removed, eliminating another potential source of evidence about the systematic infanticide. The medical community's response to the cover-up revealed the extent of professional complicity in the experimental program. Rather than investigating reports of unusual mortality rates or questioning Dr. Pemberton's methods, medical societies praised his contributions to understanding Negro Constitution and awarded him honors for advancing racial science. His published papers, which omitted mention of deliberate interventions, became standard references in medical education. Federal authorities played a crucial role in legitimizing the cover-up by classifying all plantation-related documents as matters of national security that required protection from abolition agitators who might use them to inflame tensions between North and South. This classification provided legal justification for destroying evidence and prosecuting anyone who attempted to investigate the plantation's operations. The thoroughness of the cover-up operation suggests that the Whitmore plantation was not an isolated case, but part of a larger program that required protection at the highest levels of government and society. The coordination between local officials, federal authorities, medical professionals, and legal systems created multiple layers of protection that prevented exposure for over a century and a half. By 1850, official records showed no trace that the Whitmore plantation had ever existed. Census data, property records, tax rolls, and legal documents had all been altered or destroyed to eliminate evidence of the estate and its operations. The systematic nature of this documentation erasure required resources and authority that extended far beyond local plantation owners. The cover-up's success in eliminating contemporary evidence of the experimental program ensured that the systematic murder of enslaved children could continue at other locations without fear of exposure. The message sent to potential witnesses and resistors was clear. Challenging the plantation system would result not only in death, but in the complete erasure of one's existence from historical memory. Chapter 9. The truth emerges and justice denied. The discovery of Martha Henley's journal in 2024 has finally brought to light one of the most horrific chapters in American slavery. But the revelation has also highlighted the ongoing challenges of achieving justice for historical atrocities and confronting the systems that enabled such systematic cruelty to occur and be covered up for nearly 2 centuries. Contemporary forensic analysis of the Whitmore plantation site has confirmed many of Martha's documented observations. Ground-penetrating radar has identified multiple burial sites containing the remains of infants and young children, while soil samples have revealed traces of mercury, arsenic, and other toxic substances consistent with the poisoning protocols described in the journal. Physical evidence has validated Martha's testimony and confirmed the systematic nature of the infanticide program. DNA analysis of recovered remains has allowed researchers to identify family relationships among the victims, revealing the scope of the breeding programs and the systematic destruction of family units that characterized the plantation's operations. Isotope analysis of bones has confirmed deliberate malnutrition and exposure to environmental toxins, providing scientific proof of the experimental protocols that Martha documented in such detail. The identification of Dr. Pemberton's experimental network has led to investigations of other plantations mentioned in the recovered correspondence, with similar discoveries being made across Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. The coordinated nature of the medical conspiracy has been confirmed through archaeological evidence and surviving documentation, revealing that the systematic murder of enslaved children was far more widespread than previously imagined. However, the legal response to these discoveries has been limited by statutes of limitations, the death of all direct perpetrators, and the challenge of prosecuting institutions and families that inherited wealth built on documented atrocities. While academic institutions have acknowledged the involvement of their predecessors in experimental programs, meaningful reparations or accountability measures have been minimal. The medical community's reckoning with its historical complicity has been similarly incomplete. While some medical schools have established scholarships or research programs focused on health disparities, the profession has largely avoided confronting the extent to which respected physicians participated in systematic murder and torture. Professional organizations have issued statements acknowledging past wrongdoing, but have resisted calls for comprehensive investigations of historical medical racism. Descendants of enslaved people from the Whitmore plantation and other experimental sites have organized to demand recognition, accountability, and reparations for the systematic murder of their ancestors. Their efforts have been supported by some historians and activists, but have faced resistance from institutions and individuals who benefit from the wealth generated by slavery, and who prefer to treat historical atrocities as closed chapters rather than ongoing injustices. The preservation of Martha's journal and other recovered documents has created an archive of evidence that continues to reveal new information about the scope and coordination of experimental programs on enslaved populations. Researchers have identified connections between plantation experiments and later medical atrocities, including the Tuskegee syphilis study and other instances of medical racism that continued well into the 20th century. The story of the Whitmore plantation has also highlighted the crucial role played by resistance networks and individuals like Martha Henley, who risked everything to document and expose systematic atrocities. Their courage in preserving evidence, despite overwhelming danger, has made it possible for the truth to emerge and for the victims to be remembered and honored. Educational initiatives have begun incorporating the Whitmore plantation story into curricula about slavery, medical ethics, and historical resistance, ensuring that future generations understand both the depths of systematic cruelty that characterized American slavery and the courage of those who fought to expose and resist such atrocities. The ongoing investigation of plantation experimental sites has revealed that Martha's journal was part of a larger network of documentation created by enslaved people and their allies who understood that preserving evidence was essential for eventual justice. Additional hidden records continue to be discovered, each adding to our understanding of the systematic nature of medical racism and the extent of coordinated efforts to destroy enslaved families. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of the Whitmore plantation children. We'll see you in the next video.